Unit 3, Reading 2.
The Atlantic slave trade became one of the most terrible and deadly chapters in human history. On the coast of Africa, local leaders would capture or kidnap people for trade. Europeans built forts like Elmina in today's Ghana to collect captured people and ship them across the Atlantic Ocean. Africans were usually packed so tightly into ships that they could not move. Many died on this long forced ocean journey. Work on the sugar and tobacco plantations was extremely difficult. Slaves were punished harshly, often by whipping, and they often had to work until they died. It was common for children born in slavery to be taken away from their parents. No one knows how many people died because of slavery, but it was probably millions. Slavery of black people became an important part of the economy in the New World for hundreds of years. Ending slavery would be a very slow and difficult struggle. The system of slavery would also create deep social, cultural, and economic problems which are still having effects today. Labor in the colonies also came from people called indentured servants from England. Traveling by ship was expensive, and indentured servants would agree to work for an employer in the colonies to pay the costs of their trip. They often had to work for many years before they could pay back the cost and become free to work somewhere else. Sometimes criminals or the poor were sent from Europe to the Americas as indentured servants. Georgia, for instance, was founded as a colony to give new life to poor people who couldn't pay their debts or find work in England. By the end of the 1700s, part of the eastern coast of North America was divided into 13 British colonies. The northeastern colonies were called New England. They depended on the sea for fishing and trade, while Boston became an important port. The middle colonies were home to many small farmers. Cities like Philadelphia and New York began to grow. The southern colonies were hotter and began to develop large plantations which were worked by African slaves. Many slaves came in chains through ports like Charleston. There were also giant forests and land to the west of the low Appalachian Mountains. The Ohio and Mississippi rivers became important water routes in these western lands. All of these English colonies had governors who were chosen by the king, but there were also local elected governments. For instance, Virginia's elected local assembly was founded in 1642. The Europeans who came to these colonies were not only English, but also German, Irish, Scots, and Dutch. Most of the colonists were Protestant Christians, but many Irish were Catholic. Many of the white settlers were poor, so they wanted to find new land for farming. In Europe, much of the good land was already owned, so the colonists believed that they could build a new beginning by living in the western frontier. This land was not always empty land, however. When moving west, these people came into conflict with Native Americans. France was friendly with many of these Indian nations, so England and France began to have conflicts over the land in American colonies. Although England was one of the most free and powerful countries in the world by the late 1700s, many people in the colonies became unhappy living under the government of the British Empire.